Garrett Davis is determined to save lives one story at a time. The award-winning playwright, director, and producer has been bringing real-life situations to urban stages for over 25 years and has inspired audiences across the country. From Mama's Girls to Forget-Me-Not, Garrett Davis is on a mission to disrupt the aging process, bring awareness to health disparities, challenging our communities, and make us laugh along the way. I caught up with my dear friend recently at the AARP Georgia home office here in Atlanta to talk about his life's work and his future endeavors. I'm Deborah Tyler Horton, and this is In My Own Words, presented by AARP Georgia. Garrett Davis, husband, father, artist, man of God. Let's begin at the beginning. How did it all start? What came about that how did you know you were going to be a storyteller?
I don't know if there was an exact time that I knew. I guess it was the course of things happening over time. It was my dream to own my own radio station. I went to Fayetteville State University to major in theater and radio and TV broadcasting. Theater was just something on the side. And so I finally got an opportunity to run a radio station. I was the DJ, the general manager, the salesperson, the engineer, and everything. And
doing it all.
We needed some money, so I had written a play in my college years. I said, you know what, I'm gonna do this play to raise some money for the radio station. Deborah, it was like I made more money doing that play in one weekend than I was making, in a year. So I started making deals with God. If I sell out the next city, I'm gonna quit my job. If I sell out the next city, I'm gonna quit my job. But I began to see how important it was to tell a story. And none of the stories at the time were true. They were just stories that I would see things and I write about it. At the time, I was writing about relationships. I kind of wanted to be the next Tyler Perry, but years later, I would find out that it wasn't about that. God had a different story for me. But it was during those times when I did that first play to raise money for the radio station, and God began to show me that He had something else different for me.
Well, I want to read something I read that you had written. And it said, oftentimes we discover God's divine purpose for our life only after championing through our greatest trials, losses, and disappointments. So you wrote the play, Forget-Me-Not. And you said you wrote it because of your grandmother goodness. Right. And this work, and the focus was on Alzheimer's and a very specific target to the African American community. Can you tell us how that came about?
You see, goodness was the apple of my eye, and I was the apple of hers. I was the oldest of 23 grandchildren, the first one to go to college, and I remember going home from spring break, Deborah, and goodness didn't know who I was. And being young and immature, I couldn't deal with that. So, goodness raised me. That's her real name. She raised me, and to go home and she didn't know who I was, I didn't want to go back and see her like that. So I didn't go back into the funeral. And that was years later. And then it was years after that, my sisters and my aunts and my mom, my cousins said, goodness would ask about you from time to time. So now I got this guilt on me. So I decided, being a playwright, I decided to write a play on Alzheimer's. It wasn't about her, it wasn't about me. It was just a kind of therapy for me to bring closure in my life. And Deborah was going to do it one weekend in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And that one weekend turned into like 6 consecutive weekends. And before I knew it, Forget-Me-Not was, a vehicle to raise the awareness of Alzheimer's in the Black community. And so since goodness died from that, I wanted to know as much as I could about Alzheimer's. So I began to become a volunteer with the Alzheimer's Association. I became an ambassador. In 2012, Obama was trying to make every state Alzheimer's ready. And so we were going around to different states trying to get feedback from the Black community, but I would find I would be the only Black person in the room. And so I was bold and always not scared of anything, and I asked the Alzheimer's Association, could I do my own listening and input session? Because when we were traveling around the country, there would be maybe 25, 50 people there at the most. And so I chose Richmond, Virginia. I contacted the mayor, I contacted congressmen, I contacted all the important people in that city. We had over 1,000 people in a gymnasium in Richmond, Virginia. And the thing that stuck out to me, brings tears to my eyes now, this little 80-year-old lady walked in and said, I want to know about the disease that I think I have. And so I began to see the power of how theater And messaging and storytelling could attract people. And then once you get them there, you put the right people in place to give them what they need.
Garrett, you talked about your experiences. How did you know? When did it just kind of hit you that this is bigger than entertainment?
In addition to that listening input session that we were doing, we was traveling the country with the Alzheimer's Association. Up until recent, all of my creations have been something that I've just kind of came up with. I met some identical twins in Petersburg, Virginia. They were at our prostate cancer show, Daddy's Boys in Richmond, and they run a diabetes clinic. And so I said, maybe I can connect with them to kind of put some more life into my show, Mama's Girls 2, which was dealing with, raising awareness of diabetes. And so when I went to see them, I had done no prep work. I'm sitting out in the parking lot, and I Googled them, and I found out that at 40, they discovered they had congestive heart failure. So why I was there was totally different than what was about to happen. So when I started talking with the twins, I realized, I started thinking about my mother. I grew up in the country in Warren County. She would go to work at 11 o'clock, get off at 7, be back home by 8:30 in the morning. She would cook, clean. She'd be up for us to get from school at 3:30. She's back in the bed at 6 or 7 o'clock, and I'm waking her up at 9 o'clock to get ready to go to work. The cycle continues over and over again. So the twins began to tell me that at 40, who they were in perfect health, they worked in an ER department, that they were tired. And one day they were walking up the steps, one of them, and got out of breath and went to go get checked out, and their heart was pumping at 20%. Congestive heart failure. I immediately began to think about my mother and every black woman in America who's working 2 or 3 jobs, trying to make ends meet, who are working 40, 50, 60 hours a week. They're tired, and they can excuse tiredness with something being wrong. And I said, you know what? This whole platform of trying to close that health disparities gap through the performing arts is a whole lot bigger than me. And those twins, when they tell their story, they said, why is this happening to me? And then for them to look at me and say, now God has given me the reasons because of working with you and G-Davis Production to put our story out to help other people, such as at heart. I mean, I'm just in awe that God is using me to do this, and it's a whole lot bigger than me, Deborah. It's bigger than me.
Well, I want to take you back a minute. I heard in the middle of that sentence you mentioned Mama's Girls.
Yeah.
So tell us how you got involved with AARP.
I should ask you that question. I was doing Forget Me Not, and I was putting so much into Forget Me Not. That's when, I just dedicated my life to trying to raise the awareness of all disease in the African American community, but I couldn't get funding. I remember coming to you and I said, Deborah, can you help me with some funding with this play? And you said, no, because, we're dealing with disease specific, and you and I were doing a lunch and learn on caregiving. And I never forget this book called Prepare to Care. Yeah. I went home and I looked at that book and I said, you know what, I'm going to write a play around this book. I'm going to do 5 sisters from 5 different cities trying to take care of their aging mother, and I'm not going to give her a disease.
I remember you calling me. I wasn't even home yet after that session, and my phone was ringing in the car.
Right.
I got an idea.
And so we went to see Edna in D.C., and Mama's Girls was the foundation to everything that has happened to me afterwards. It was because of AARP and you and Edna Kane Williams believing in and the vision that we had. And Mama's Girls was one of the longest running off-Broadway urban stage plays in America, 8 consecutive years. And I never saw that coming. And from that, the American Diabetes Association called, and we got Mama's Girls 2, Sugar Ain't Sweet. And the reason we call it Sugar Ain't Sweet, because in our communities, what do we call diabetes? Sugar. And so I wanted to do something that connected with our community. And then from that, the Prostate Health Education Network called me, and now we have Daddy's Boys, and now we have the American Heart Association with Sisters at Heart. And so, it was because of Mama's Girls, over 100 plus performances over the course of 8 years and touring over, I don't know how many states and how many cities, but it was a wonderful ride. I miss working with AARP on that level, but that was the foundation to what we're doing now. Had it not been for Mama's Girls, I wouldn't be sitting here.
So, speaking of AARP, its mission is committed to empowering individuals, helping you live your best life in the city and the communities that you want to live. how have you, and part of that is really disrupting aging, you know, what it's like after that number, 50 plus. Talk to us a little bit about how after the 50 plus, you continue to do the things that you dreamed about, worked hard for.
You know, I've always had a lot of energy. I've always been, you know, bouncing here and there. And the early days working with AARP, when I found out you could get, you know, benefits even before you're 50, you know, you can become a member. And I became a member, you know, when we were, you know, doing with Mama's Girls. But, you know, I'll be 55 my next birthday. And I never thought at 55 I would be doing the things that I'm doing now. And so age is purely a number. You know, age is purely a number to me now, because I've got so many things I want to do. I don't think about, well, I'm 55, I'm getting 60, I got to retire. You know, I plan to work until I can't work anymore, until my eyes just close. I'll rest when I die. And so I think that whole life reimagined, that whole AARP, you know, life, you know, 50 is just a start. You know what I'm saying? I mean, the best years are in front of me, only because I'm more mature now, and being around, you know, companies like a AARP to kind of let me see how things should really be going, and not giving up and slowing down.
So one thing I realize, and just listening to you talk as well, every production that you've done has a meaning and a message. Can you share with us a story or share someone that you know has been impacted by the work that you've done? Oh, wow. How it's changed their life?
I tell you what, you know, one of the things that we do after all of our shows, the cast always goes to the audience, into the lobby, and we try to shake as many hands as we can, because I never want us to be above an audience, because without an audience, you know, we don't exist. And we don't charge for our productions unless it's, you know, it's an extreme emergency. So it's free, because we don't want the dollar to be a reason why someone can't get this information. But I'll never forget, we was doing Mama's Girls in, I think, Chicago. And five ladies came up and said, "We're Mama's Girls. We're all 5 sisters," you know. And the oldest sister, with tears in her eyes, said, "You know what? Mama had 5. The 5 couldn't take care of 1." And we saw ourselves on that stage. And thank you for allowing us to go to that Prepare to Care booklet. So we're going to go back home. We're going to distribute these duties out. Man, that's you can't buy that. You know what I'm saying? That AARP booklet has been there forever. You know, the play's been touring forever. But when those two came together, and you put everybody in the right place at the right time, that's when God moves. And you know, you can't buy that. So that, you know, it's stories like that I could tell from all the production, but that one sticks out. Is when people see themselves on stage and say, you know what, I can do better. And that's my whole point. You know, the difference between me and any other person, you know, is not that my plays are greater. It's just that when you leave my play, I want you to be able to go back home and have a conversation with your husband, your dad, your sister, your brother about how to make my quality of life better. It's more than just laughing. I want to give you something that's going to, yeah.
You know, Garrett, someone can't come into your presence, can't have a conversation with you without realizing and knowing how passionate you are about the work that you do. And I thank you for the work that you do and what you bring to the communities that we serve. So what's next for Garrett Davis?
Well, I started this data collection company because one of the things I began to see was my sponsors were not used to having thousands of people at an event, and they're giving out, you know, information for folks to fill out. You know, you got 1,000 people, you may get 100 back. So now everyone who comes to my play gets a clicker. And so now I'm collecting data for my sponsors so they can go back and really define how to help this community. And the other thing is, I guess next is, I want to do, you know, Mama's Girls, the next generation, because I think if I'm under 30, I'm not thinking about retiring, I'm not thinking about caregiving, but if something happens to my mother, my life changes forever tomorrow. So I kind of want to, you know, maybe it's not a play, maybe it's a web series, and we have the young people and how they deal with caregiving and things that affect them. Because in order to reach, you know, we're reaching a good job of reaching that older demographic, but how do we reach those younger people? So I kind of want to do the next generation of what I'm doing electronically and figure out how I can reach even more people.
Garrett, we've been talking a lot about reaching young people earlier, you know, whether it's around caregiving, finances. There's so much going on around us, and it's so important that we reach these young people where they are. Right. So whether it's in the church, in the school, whether at college level, Talk to us about some of the work that you're doing that reaches those young people where they are, that's going to that intergenerational level, but embracing all those things that are ahead for them, like caregiving, finances, even bullying.
Right. So when we talk young people, you could give you and I a magazine or a piece of paper, we can read it and we make the adjustments. Well, a young person may or may not read it, okay? Not that they can't, it's just that they may not. And so the thing with young people that I have found out, you have to change how they feel. If you can change how they feel, you can change how they think. If you can change how they think, you can change what they do. And so, like with bullying, that word has become so overused, in my opinion. I have a daughter who goes to school, and if for some reason she can't sit with the person on a field trip, then I may overact and say my child's being bullied. Well, she's not. So we have a pilot program going in Winston-Salem, North Carolina at Meadowlark Middle School. And so we interviewed 10 young people and asked them, what is bullying? Then we asked the parents of those young people, what is bullying? Then we asked the teachers, what is bullying? We came with 3 different answers. So if you got 3 different answers, how are you going to solve the problem? So based on those answers, we came up with small vignettes, small plays, scenes, and where the kids would take the clicker and say, this is bullying, this isn't bullying. And now we can kind of close that gap with what it is. And so with young people, you really have to touch them here, because if they don't get it here, they're not going to do it.
And there's so much competition on how you get to the heart when you look at television and the theater and movies. So this approach that you're doing is unique.
It's unique, but at the end of the day, I think when you're dealing with young people, keep it simple. Keep it simple and listen to them. And so we wanted them to know that I'm going to listen to you. What do you think is bullying? Why do you think people over-respond when you're joking around? So we really have to make adults see where young people are, and that young people see where adults are, and then you have to bring the parents. It's a complicated layers, but once you put everybody in the same room and begin to see it, now we're trying to change the culture. And so as opposed to using the word bullying, what we're trying to do, we want to be kind to people. We want to, treat people fair, treat people nice. Is that bullying or is that being mean? There's a difference if I come, knock your papers out your hand and get a laugh because I'm with my guys. That's not bullying. But someone who's looking at it would say, that's bullying. So how do we get this whole culture? And so we do these, like I said, these small vignettes, these small scenes to let people see, and then we let them decide, is it mean, is it bullying, or is it just obnoxious? And so,
have you seen a difference in the conversation now between the young people and their parents, and even the teachers?
Parents are saying now, I'm sorry for calling it bullying. For instance, one example was, and the example I used, there was a school, they go to DC every year to tour DC. And so the kids get to select who's in their room. So that you can only put 4 girls in a room. And so, most average young girls got more than 4 friends. So since she couldn't get in that room, the parent called and said, they're bullying my child. They won't let her in the room. Well, that's not bullying. You know what I'm saying? And so it's all of presentation and how you look at something. And so hopefully the work that we're doing, one thing about theater, you get to see yourself on stage. And it'll change your opinion. It'll change your mindset. And so again, if you can change the way someone feels, the way someone thinks, then you can change action.
Garrett, it's clear one cannot be in your presence without feeling the passion that you have for the work that you do. You are clearly no ordinary playwright. So I want to know, what's next for Garrett Davis?
Wow. I heard a statistic recently. I don't know if you've heard it. 25% of millennials are caregivers.
That's right. That's correct.
So how are we reaching them? So one of the things I thought about when I look out into the audience, the targeted demographic of those that come to our plays are like, 45 plus. So I'm not reaching those millennials through the plays. So, one of the things we want to do with GH Productions is come up with a web series from the young person's point of view of caregiving. Because if I'm under 40, if I'm a millennial, I'm not thinking about retirement. I'm not thinking about caregiving. I'm thinking about when's the next spring break, who am I connecting with, where's the next party. But if something happens to my mother tonight, my life changes forever tomorrow. And how am I prepared for that? And we all know who ends up taking care of mama, whoever lives closest to her. And so I want to do something to reach them electronically, whether it's a web series or something like that. So that's what we're working on next.
So Garrett, I want to take you back based on what you just said, and that is reaching that younger audience. So if you could go back to that younger Garrett Davis, when you went home to see your grandmother. For that young person that's sitting there now listening to us, how would you have handled that?
Deborah, totally different. Fighting back tears, I was immature. And because I was selfish and didn't want to see her like that, I chose not to go back. And so for a young person that's listening to me, that's the time to be strong and step up, especially if you're a black man. So I would probably tell the younger Garrett, that's one thing that you can't make right because you didn't go back. But moving forward, that's why, Deborah, I'm so passionate now, so that young people see that caregiving is real. Life is real. No matter how hard and long a day is, life is still short. Yes. Maya Angelou. So I would tell that younger Garrett, okay, take a minute, absorb all that you just took in, understanding what's going on with goodness, but do not leave her. Do not leave your family. And so that's what I would tell that younger Garrett.
So thank you for sharing that. I know it wasn't easy. Thank you so much.